Jack stood on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, as the crisp morning air brushed against his skin. This neighborhood wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. He had lived here for over 10 years, in a small house with a brown-tiled roof, a brick-paved front yard, and a tiny flower garden he tended himself. Jack wasn't the social type. After his wife passed away in an accident 3 years ago, he withdrew into his own world, working remotely as a programmer and only interacting with a few friendly neighbors. But not everyone was like that. Karen, a woman in her 50s who lived across the street, was a key member of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She didn't enjoy peace, she enjoyed control. Karen patrolled the neighborhood with a notebook in hand, searching for any violations to issue warning letters or fines. Jack had never had any problems with the HOA before. He didn't throw loud parties, didn't park illegally, and never broke any rules. But he knew the HOA could be a nuisance if they decided to target someone. This morning, as Jack retrieved his mail from the mailbox, he noticed an envelope bearing the HOA's emblem. Opening it, he frowned. Violation notice and payment request, $55. Failure to pay within 30 days may result in property seizure. Jack furrowed his brows. $55? He had never received any prior notice. Setting his coffee down, he went inside, opened his computer, and checked his HOA payments. Everything had been paid on time. No outstanding dues. This must be a mistake. But Jack didn't know that. From today onward, his peaceful life was about to be completely turned upside down. Jack double-checked his payment records. Every HOA bill had been paid in full and on time. There was no outstanding balance. He sighed, closed his laptop, and picked up his phone. If this was a mistake, it was best to resolve it immediately. The HOA's phone number was printed on the violation notice. Jack dialed it, but all he got was hold music. After nearly 10 minutes, a cold, female voice answered, "Maplewood Homeowners Association, how may I assist you?" "Hi, this is Jack, the homeowner at 47 Maple Street. I just received a violation notice from the HOA for a $55 fine, but I don't have any unpaid dues. There must be some kind of mistake." The voice on the other end remained flat, as if she had handled hundreds of calls like this before. "Mr. Jack, the $55 fee is a penalty for the grass in your front yard exceeding 3 inches, which violates HOA regulations. You need to pay within 30 days. Jack frowned. Overgrown grass? He mowed his lawn regularly every week. "My grass is well within the limit. Could this be an error?" "We have evidence. If you wish to dispute it, please submit an appeal via email and we will review it within 60 days. Jack took a deep breath. "If you fail to pay on time, the HOA has the right to enforce penalties, including property seizure." And with that, she hung up. Jack stared at his phone. $55 wasn't a lot of money, but something about the HOA's approach felt off. Was this just a simple mistake, or the beginning of something much worse? Jack wasn't someone who could be easily bullied. He decided to investigate the matter himself. The next morning, he took out a ruler and measured the grass in his yard. Just as he suspected, it was only 2 inches tall, well within the HOA's regulations. There was no way they could fine him for this. He took pictures as evidence and emailed the HOA office to dispute the violation. But by the end of the day, there was still no response. Jack began researching the Maplewood HOA. On the official website, he found a list of board members. President, Karen Willis. Vice President, Mark Evans. Treasurer, Susan Price. He wasn't surprised to see Karen Six as the president. She always liked being in control. Digging deeper, Jack discovered that the HOA had been criticized before for issuing unreasonable fines, but no one had dared to challenge them directly. After dinner, Jack stepped outside hoping to talk to some neighbors. He ran into David, a middle-aged man who lived nearby. David, have you ever been fined by the HOA for ridiculous reasons? David sighed, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. Of course. They fined me $100 for placing my trash can in the wrong position. When I protested, they threatened to increase my management fees. I had no choice but to pay to avoid more trouble. Jack clenched his fists. So he wasn't the only victim. A sense of unease crept into his mind. If the HOA could do this to him and David, they could do it to anyone. Jack knew he couldn't stay silent. He had to dig deeper. And more importantly, find a way to fight back. Jack woke up early the next morning, still feeling restless. He decided not to wait for the HOA's response. If they were ignoring him on purpose, he would take matters into his own hands. He opened his laptop and started researching the legal powers of HOAs. After a few hours of reading, Jack discovered something crucial. An HOA cannot seize someone's home over a small fine. According to state law, to foreclose on a property, an HOA must prove that the homeowner has failed to pay mandatory dues for an extended period and has received proper legal notices. His $55 fine clearly did not meet those conditions. So why was the HOA escalating the situation? Jack suspected Karen was abusing her authority, but he needed proof. He remembered his father's advice. His dad had been a seasoned lawyer. Jack decided to give him a call. Dad, I'm having trouble with my HOA. They're threatening to seize my house over a $55 fine. Is that even legal? His father was silent for a few seconds before replying. That sounds suspicious. Have you checked their regulations? I have. They have no legal basis for doing this. Then you need to gather evidence. If the HOA is breaking the law, you can take them to court. Jack nodded. This was no longer just his problem. It was a fight against co-fight Ion. Jack took action. He went to the HOA office and asked to speak with Karen, but the receptionist refused, saying, Mrs. Willis is busy. Not giving up, Jack requested a copy of all his past payments and fines. The receptionist hesitated, but eventually handed him the documents. As Jack flipped through them, he quickly noticed something strange. He had never received any fine over $10 before. There was no record of any prior notice about the $55 fine before the foreclosure letter. Jack took photos of the documents, keeping them as evidence. As he left the office, he ran into Karen at the door. What are you doing here, Jack? She asked coldly. Just checking my account information. Karen smirked. I suggest you pay that fine soon. It would be in your best interest. Jack stared straight into her eyes. I don't take kindly to threats, Karen. She shrugged and walked away. Jack knew he had just stepped into a real fight. Jack knew he couldn't fight alone. He decided to seek out other residents who had also been mistreated by the HOA. He started by visiting Mr. Richard, an elderly man living at the end of the street. Mr. Richard had lived in the neighborhood for a long time and had seen many changes brought by the HOA. I'm not surprised you're having trouble with Karen, he said, shaking his head. She's been forcing me to pay ridiculous fines for years. If I refused, they threatened to sue me. Do you have any proof? Jack asked. Mr. Richard nodded slowly and pulled out a worn-out folder. These are all the fines I've kept over the years. Some of them don't even have a clear reason. Jack realized this was a major breakthrough. If he could gather enough evidence from multiple residents, he could prove that the HOA had been abusing its power for years. He continued meeting other neighbors in the community. Mrs. Linda was fined for planting flowers that didn't match the HOA's color guidelines. The Johnson family was forced to repaint their house just because Karen didn't like the old color. Mark, a single father, was fined for parking violations, even though he hadn't broken any rules. After an entire evening of collecting testimonies, Jack uncovered a shocking truth. Karen and the HOA had made tens of thousands of dollars from these unfair fines. That evening, Jack decided to attend the HOA meeting, where Karen and the other board members would be present. As Jack stepped into the meeting room, Karen was already waiting for him, a faint smile on her lips. "What are you doing here, Jack?" Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped a thick stack of files onto the table. "I want answers. The HOA has been unfairly fining me and many others. I have proof." The room fell silent. Some HOA members looked nervous. Karen raised an eyebrow. "Do you really think you can take on the HOA?" Jack stared straight at her. "I don't just think, I know I can." Karen wasn't going to back down easily. She knew Jack was trying to expose the HOA's corruption, but she was experienced enough to fight back. "Mr. Jack," Karen said slowly, "if you have issues with the fees, you're welcome to file a formal complaint, but do not disrupt our meeting." Jack smirked. "I've tried contacting the HOA multiple times, but I was ignored. Don't talk to me about proper procedures." Karen scanned the room, looking for support. Some HOA members nodded in agreement with her, but others seemed uncertain. After the meeting, the HOA launched a series of dirty tactics to pressure Jack into giving up. 1. More fines. Jack received a flood of new violation notices. They accused him of letting his grass grow too long, placing his trash bins incorrectly, and painting his door the wrong shade. 2. Harassing Jack's supporters. Residents who had sided with Jack suddenly faced unexpected inspections. Minus Mr. Richard was ordered to affix his fence at a cost of thousands of dollars. Mrs. Linda was told to remove her entire flower garden. 3. Personal attacks. One morning, Jack's car was vandalized. The windshield was smashed and the tires were slashed. When he reported it to the police, they said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate. Jack now understood the HOA would stop at nothing to silence him. But he had no intention of backing down. Jack had no choice but to attack head-on. If he let the HOA continue its tyranny, not only he but the entire neighborhood would live in fear forever. Jack knew he couldn't fight alone. He began reaching out to every neighbor who had been mistreated by the HOA. Mr. Richard, who was forced to repair his fence, agreed to help Jack and gather evidence. Mrs. Linda, whose garden was destroyed, introduced Jack to an investigative journalist. She knew. Several other residents, despite their fears, secretly provided documents showing how the HOA had abused its power for years. Before long, Jack had a complete file, proving the HOA was operating illegally. Jack sent all the documents to Craig, his father, a veteran lawyer. His father reviewed every detail and confirmed, "We have enough evidence to take the HOA to court." Jack decided not just to file a personal complaint, but to launch a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone who had suffered under the HOA's rule. At the next HOA meeting, Jack arrived with a thick file in hand. He stood up, looking directly at Karen. "I have proof of the HOA's abuse of power. If you don't revoke all the unjust fines, I will take this to court." Karen's face paled. She tried to remain calm, but the entire room started murmuring. Some HOA members began doubting Karen and turning against her. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She hired a legal team to defend the HOA and declared she would fight to the bitter end. The legal battle had officially begun. After the heated meeting, Jack and his father officially filed a lawsuit in court. The case wasn't just about the ridiculous $55 fine. but about exposing years of HOA corruption and abuse. The media took notice. More and more residents joined the lawsuit, turning this into a community-wide fight. Karen refused to back down. She hired a powerful team of lawyers to defend the HOA and had tried to cover up the truth. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Jack stood with the plaintiffs, alongside the affected residents. Karen and the HOA's legal team sat on the defendant's side, looking completely confident. Jack's father stepped forward and addressed the court. "Your Honor, this is not just a case about an unfair fine. This is a case against abuse of power, against an organization that has turned residents' lives into a nightmare." The HOA's lawyers fought back, arguing that Jack was exaggerating the issue and that the HOA was simply enforcing its rules. Jack presented a series of documents proving 1. The HOA illegally collected thousands of dollars from residents over the years. 2. Karen and some HOA members embezzled community funds for personal gain. 3. Some fines were completely baseless, designed to pressure homeowners into selling their properties cheaply, so the HOA could transfer them to their associates. But the decisive blow was the investigative journalist, introduced by Mrs. Linda, revealed a secret recording in which Karen admitted to using her power to force Jack and others out of the neighborhood. The entire courtroom was stunned. The judge issued the verdict. The HOA had violated the law. Karen was removed from her position and ordered to compensate the affected residents. The HOA was forced to completely reform, and all unreasonable regulations were abolished. Jack won. He not only kept his home, but also liberated the entire neighborhood from the HOA's oppression. After the court's decision, Karen lost all her power. She was forced to leave the HOA, losing the position she had dominated for years. Residents who once feared her spoke out in protest, expressing their outrage over her actions. The media covered the scandal widely, completely destroying Karen's reputation. Furthermore, an official investigation was launched, uncovering years of financial fraud within the HOA. Under pressure from the residents, the HOA was forced to undergo a complete overhaul. Unjust fines were canceled. Financial management became transparent. Residents were given the right to elect new board members, rather than letting a small group control everything. Jack and the neighbors who fought alongside him became symbols of change, helping the community escape its oppressive regime. Refusing to accept defeat, Karen attempted to file an appeal. She hired another lawyer to reverse the verdict, but this time, no one believed her anymore. The court quickly dismissed the appeal. Karen officially lost. A few weeks later, Karen left the neighborhood in silence. No one saw her off. No one cared. After everything, Jack could finally live peacefully in his home. The neighbors were more united than ever. His friendship with Mrs. Linda grew stronger. Jack was no longer the quiet man who avoided trouble. He had become someone who stood up for justice. After the victory, Jack realized his life had changed forever. He was no longer someone who simply endured in silence. Jack learned the value of fighting for what's right. Most importantly, he knew he was not alone. The community had fought alongside him, and now they were more united than ever. Under the new leadership, the neighborhood became a better place. Unjust rules were abolished, and all decisions were now transparent and public. Residents had a voice and were no longer afraid. People became more open and caring, bound together by the fight they had shared. After everything, Jack not only kept his home, but also found a new purpose. He decided to study law to help others facing similar situations. He became an advisor to residents, helping them understand their rights. Most importantly, Jack Boppertin felt proud of what he had accomplished. He had Bomber stood up, fought, and won. One afternoon, Jack sat on his porch, soaking in the golden sunset. A sense of peace filled him. Neighbors greeted one another cheerfully, without fear. Karen was gone, and the HOA's dark past was now just a cautionary tale. Jack smiled. The battle was over, and this was a new beginning. Moral of the story: never remain silent in the face of injustice, for sometimes one voice can change an entire community.